there and welcome to another episode of Inspired to Act from Thrive Ireland. I'm Diane Holt.
And I'm Will Leach, and it's nice to be back with you because, Diane, we do love doing this.
Do you know, we do. We hope you've enjoyed meeting the people we bring here as much as we have.
And guess what? We've done it again. This time it's someone with decades of experience in the faith and community sector, a man who believes strongly that everybody matters and everybody belongs.
So welcome to Mark Houston, Director at the Link Family and Community Centre in Newtownards. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
Great to see you and great to have you with us on Inspired to Act. What even is the Link?
The Link is a diamond. The Link is a diamond. It is multifaceted. It has potential. It has realised a lot of potential. It has more potential to realise. It's polished and other bits are yet to be more polished. I say diamond because it has so many different elements. I guess we've got four main projects that our work currently revolves around, and they've developed over the last 15 to now 27 years.
I was actually thinking, is it, because it started in January 1997, and you know, Mark, I know quite a lot about the Link. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking it's going to be 30 years really soon, but 27 and a half, yeah. Do tell us more detail. I mean, give us an idea of the different programmes that you're involved with and the different people that you're engaging with.
The four main things are we run a project called the Mark Project, no relation to me. Stands for Making a Real Change. I haven't named the project after myself. It's all about me.
Everybody loves a chief executive or director who does that.
Yeah. Stands for Making a Real Change, and we work with people recovering from substance dependency. For those over 40, that tends to be alcohol. For those under 40, it tends to be drugs of a wide range. And we work with them in two ways. One, to help them with their dependency, and two, to help them maintain their tenancy. And we get some funding from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to do that. That works for the Housing Executive because if someone's homeless, that's their problem. And we've got a good success rate with that. We've people from 8-9 years dry to people 8-9 weeks dry, and one or two who are 8 or 9 minutes dry, and that might be questionable. So that's the Mark Project. We then run, in conjunction with the local churches in Ards, 15 local churches co-fund the Ards Churches Christians Against Poverty Debt Centre. And we work with currently 31 or 32 families, helping them become debt-free. Our hit rate's very good. We've now just helped the 19th family become debt-free in the last 2.5 years, wow, which is quite an astonishing thing, quite miraculous. And some would say almost as miraculous as 15 churches working together in Northern Ireland. So that's the debt centre. And it's a privilege to get to do that. That's so core and central to the gospel, particularly in Luke 4, that we love to get to do that. Then run a project called Life, which is working with young, mainly single mums aged 16 to 24, young single mums with single parents, and all very similar issues, I suppose, to the Mark Project. There are physical, mental health issues, poverty, debt, social isolation, involvement with the criminal justice system or social services. So we work with them 3 days a week. And then we run English classes for speakers of other languages. That's kind of a euphemism for refugees and asylum seekers. And we're currently working with around 12 to 15 Syrian families. Over the last 2.5 years, we've worked with now over 80 Ukrainian families, mainly women and young children. And then smaller pockets of people from Bengal, Latvia, Argentina. We're doing some one-to-one work with a lady who was trafficked here from Thailand, some from Hong Kong and smaller areas like that. So those are the kind of four main things that the Link currently does.
That last one just makes you think, doesn't it? When you think about the Northern Ireland that existed when you started in this kind of work more than 40 years ago, very little comparison. It's changed so much.
Yeah, it's a different world. It's a different world, and the fact that people from other countries even want to come to Northern Ireland in itself is a change. We sometimes joke that if you're in trouble somewhere in the world and you find yourself landing in Northern Ireland, what did you do wrong? But it's not like that now. Northern Ireland is a very attractive place to be. Ards and North Down is a very attractive place to live for lots of reasons.
You don't do all that work without a lot of help. And, I know there are 15 churches involved in the Christians Against Poverty project, but you must have a lot of volunteers because you have a relatively small staff team, haven't you?
Yeah, our staff team consists of 11 people. I think 8 of those are part-time. 3 would be full-time. But we have 45 to 50 volunteers, which we've consistently maintained even through the pandemic. We had some people during the pandemic who decided not to come back, but then we had quite an influx of people coming in who were keen to volunteer, either because they were rejuvenated and wanted to help people. We had people who had decided to retire during the pandemic, had more free time, and were keen to use that. So people volunteer anything from a couple of hours in a day to a couple of days a week in our charity shop, for example, or helping drive the van, or providing meals in the Mark Project. A wide range of volunteers from right across the sector in Ards.
So it's not just people from churches. Sometimes it's people who are coming through the different programmes, or it's people who just think, I'd really like to help and do something, give something back to the community.
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably 3/4 of our volunteers are connected to the local churches. But we have a growing number who are not, and who are wanting to live, I guess, more altruistically and help and give away to other people. And as I said before, with the pandemic, I think a number of people retired maybe earlier than they had planned to, and of course don't want, too much time to just sit around the house. So male and female volunteers as well, and a growing number of younger volunteers coming through the likes of CIRC as placements as part of their course, and the Link's a good place for them to come and get experience.
CIRC, you mean the college?
Yeah.
I know you like to see people reach the potential they have, but some of this is difficult stuff, and it bounced through my head when you were talking about the various lengths of time people can be dry: years, months, minutes. So there are going to be difficulties, there are going to be challenges, and sometimes, surely, people are going to be not convinced about what you're doing, and you might get a bit of community opposition sometimes, do you?
We get some resistance, but if I'm honest, it's minimal. We do get some kickback from time to time around our refugee work. There was a reaction a few months ago when the local prayer house, the Muslim prayer house, was attacked, and we spoke out against that alongside some of the other churches, and there was a bit of kickback about that and a bit of graffiti on the walls. Kind of low-level stuff, really, though, and we try to ignore it and work on the key relationships in the background.
I should really go back to when you were younger. Tell us a wee bit about your faith journey.
We had no faith experience at home, really. My dad was a card-carrying communist. We've actually found his little red book after he had passed away a few years ago, and that was quite a shock. To find that the person you thought was merely a Chris Christopherson fan was also a commie. But so there's no faith in the house. In fact, it was frowned upon.
And whereabouts? You in Belfast?
That was in East Belfast, Braniel Estate. We were a classic, sort of Protestant working class family from a loyalist tradition, Orange Order, etc., etc.
But no faith.
But no faith, and no church attendance at all. But in Braniel, where we grew up, our house was 100 metres to the left from the church and 100 metres to the right from the local primary school. And as young men, young teenagers in the early 70s, you could go to the church and play football or meet girls indoor in the winter, or you could go to the right and learn how to march with the UDA outdoor in the school. And sometimes it was as arbitrary as that you made a choice around being warm.
It's Baltic tonight.
Yeah.
I'll go play football.
Yeah. But others of our friends and other family members went to the right and learned to march and ended up doing serious time for being involved in violence. How much of that was designed, how much of that is choice, who knows. But through the BB, we came to faith, and we were invested in a huge amount by the leaders there who we were passionate about music. They enabled us to play, set us loose in the church. Goodness knows what it sounded like then. But we will never forget actually the risk they took, and life flourished literally from there. And they invested in young boys who needed it, and faith came alive really, and it's been part of the journey ever since.
Because someone believed in you, knew your name, knew what you might be capable of, gave you a chance to try and be something.
Yeah. Well, my classic story is the youth leader in the church asked me one day, "What are you doing on Saturday?" And I said, "Nothing." He said, "I'll pick you up at 9:30. And he came in his car, picked me up, drove me to Wright's Arcade in Newtownards from East Belfast, which is still there. I don't think it's called Wright's Arcade now. And bought me a drum kit.
Wow.
And it was £90
Wow.
in 1975 or something.
Yeah, that was a lot of
money.
pounds.
A lot of money. He had never heard me play. All he had heard was I wanted to play. And he opened the doors and believed in me and enabled me to flourish in something. And that has stayed with me, the passion to see people flourish.
That's amazing. And tell us a wee bit about some of your exploits with your brother, because obviously some people will probably know who he is too.
Yeah, we've been heckled and sometimes thrown out of some of the best music venues, certainly in Belfast, if not Ireland. And music has been a passion. It's fun. For me, it's never been really, I've been semi-professional but never fully professional, so I haven't had to rely on it to pay the bills in the way that Brian has. But certainly it has graced us with a life and fun and experiences and being with some people we would never have met otherwise.
Did he get that similar kind of chance? I mean, you got your drum kit. What did he get?
He got me to teach him 4 chords on a guitar. And
that's one more than a lot of
yeah,
bands have.
Yeah, 4 chords, and he went away and came back 2 weeks later and was light years ahead of where I would ever
It's infuriating
reach.
when brothers do that,
Yeah,
isn't it?
And he had a voice to die for, and he had the act to go with it. So I very quickly realised my place was to sit at a drum kit behind him. And so I view him from the rear, which is usually his best side.
And did you have one of those really awful 70s names?
We've been through them all. The first was Grand Arrival, which is something linked to some of those, dodgy Revelation end times books that were alive and well in the 80s. We called one band the Big Red Bus, after that big red bus that was going to knock you down when you left the meeting if you hadn't came to meet Jesus. Okay. So
that was quite cryptic.
Yeah, it was. We thought it was clever at the time.
Really quite alarming.
Yeah. And then our probably the most well-known band was a band called Communique, which was completely ripped off from the Dire Straits album at the time. And we got to play a lot of places.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, I'm afraid I was part of something in the early 70s called Sweet Communion. So it doesn't sound quite as edgy as your bands.
No.
Is it only music? Do you express yourself creatively in other ways? Do you ever scribble a wee line out and think, oh, that's poetic?
Well, in the last few years, really around the pandemic, I've written some of my own music for the first time and recorded some of it. I've also dabbled in... I don't know what to call it. I guess the classic name would be a poetry of some form. It's a little bit, but it's not classic rhyme. It's probably influenced by some of the street poetry I would hear around. So I would use it in church. Sometimes if I'm meant to speak or give a talk, I'll use a poem instead, because it might just capture what I feel is on my heart. So I've dabbled a bit with that. I've thought about putting some of that in a book. Who knows?
Oh, well, maybe you're edging slightly towards retirement, but we don't want to talk about that yet. So you weren't going to make money necessarily out of your music at that time, so you probably needed a job. So what did you end up doing?
Yeah, my career started as a young apprentice plumber in Harlan Wolff, and I was there for 11 years.
Oh, so if I have a wee problem with the plumbing, I can always come to you?
Guy.
Oh, excellent.
What colour was your hard hat?
my hard hat then was blue.
My
then
brother's
white.
was green, and he had to be careful.
Yeah. Hard hats were really just coming in then. It was only 4 men who wore hard hats. The normal guys, you just took a risk of something falling on your head. But I was there for 11 years, and probably some of the best years of my life. Taught me, you go in at 16 as a boy and you come home that night and you've had to grow up very, very quickly. But it was also a time when they invested hugely in you, in your training, your education. Again, a little bit like the church. If you showed any interest, you were enabled to flourish. And so many people in Belfast have flourished through that. Then I left there and went up the town, as they say, and into the world of mechanical engineering, and worked in it for 7 or 8 years. Then I led a church for 15 years over in South Belfast. And that, through particularly the Reverend Ken Newell at the time, opened me to the world of peacemaking, peace building, because we were situated in University Avenue, which was on an interface with the Lower Armour Road. On the day that we moved in, the Sean Graham shooting had happened in the Bookmakers. So we were thrust into an idea of what can we say that would in any way be of comfort or condemnation of violence. And Ken was incredibly helpful in fast-tracking me through that sort of world. It had changed my experience from being the sort of 90% of your life spent in the church to there's a whole world outside of the church that many pastors or leaders maybe don't get to see as much.
And is that something about bringing something of who Christ is into those different spaces outside the church? How did you see that, or where did that come from?
2 scriptures have always kind of followed me around, I think. One is Luke 4, and where the Spirit of the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to set the burdened and battered free. That's the Jesus manifesto. And that has consistently followed me in my life and my work, in the good and the bad. And then the other verse is in Ephesians 2, for he himself is our peace, who's broken down the middle wall of hostility and made the two one. Those are the bookends. That's what we get to do. And anything that enables me to play a part in that, I is a sweet spot. It's what I love.
You said something a moment ago. You said, and then I led a church for X years, and I'm thinking, whoa, bit of a step from being an engineer to leading a church. Was that a big deal? Were you doing so much that it was clear that leadership in the church was the next thing? Why did you talked about what your inspiration was biblically, but why did you decide that's what you wanted to do all the time?
Great question. I was involved in the church that I ended up leading. I was very close friends with the chap who had been leading the church, and that came to an end for him. And I guess there was a mixture of things. I had a sense of pastoral vocation. I don't want to over-egg that. It was not a Damascus Road experience, but I had a sense of pastoral vocation. I had an empathy. I found myself comfortable in speaking with people, visiting with people. And I kind of grew into it. And at the same time, there was a gap in the church that the leadership at the time needed filled. And Heather and I chatted about it. My wife Heather and I chatted about it. And we felt it was the right thing. And we went for it. And equally after that 15 years, there was a sense of it's time to stop. And it was very costly. It's very costly on a family. And I think I neglected my family at times when the girls were young particularly. I think I got weary and tired. I also had that same sense of, well, pastoring a church is a little bit like getting the best out of your people. And I thought I could do that without leading a church. And that again has followed me around, being in a position where your job is to enable people to flourish into the best version of themselves. That kind of lights me up.
And was that right? Was that your model of leadership from when you led that church, or were you sort of learning at that time through the church. What is leadership, and what does it look like, and what sort of leader do I want to be?
Yeah, and a lot of it was about the type of leader, Diane, that you don't want to be. And at that time, in the mid-90s, late 90s, church leadership, particularly with the American influence, church leaders were XXL characters. They were big personalities, big stature. The pulpit was huge. That was never me. I don't have that stature. I don't think that way. I remember one person advised me and saying, listen, when you're leading a church, you need to pick some fights with people and win, or they're going to pick fights with you and win. And I remember thinking, that's just not who I am.
No.
That's not who I want to be.
Yeah.
I was so uncomfortable with the language around it.
Yeah.
Although I've known that to be true in lots of places. It's also linked to toxic masculinity. And I'd grown up with some of that, and I think it has shaped me not to be that way. So it's always been about other people, enabling them, letting them go and do what they do well, and trying to keep out of their road, really.
Unlocking potential, basically.
Yeah.
You have mentioned a couple of times your wife Heather, your daughters. Tell us about your family.
Yeah, I've been married to Heather for 39 years in March past. Childhood sweethearts, really. So I think we've been together 45 years, married for 39. Because that's what you did when you grew up in East Belfast. 2 daughters, Sarah and Rachel. I'll not give their ages away, but they're grown up, let's say. Both have fled the nest. And we have one little granddaughter called Billy and one step-granddaughter called Molly. So life very much outside of work reverberates around them. And it's a privilege to have that element in our lives.
Yeah, and you're sort of talking about church leadership. When did you actually start to engage professionally in community stuff? You obviously were thinking peace and reconciliation, engaging with different community issues from the church perspective. But when did you begin to move into working in the community and voluntary sector, faith-based sector professionally? Yeah.
Well, as I said before, the door was open through Ken Newell at Fitzroy, and that opened the sort of Lower Ormo Road markets community. And then I moved to East Belfast Mission in around 2007, I think, from memory. And that was right in the centre of Inner East, where I'd grown up, working with primarily loyalist combatants and ex-combatants. And although there was a big overlap with Republican ex-combatants at the time. And that sort of brought me a sense of, I'm kind of meant to be here. I understand that world, and I understand how that world thinks, and I can empathise with some of the background to why people find themselves in those sorts of organisations, whilst at the same time completely rejecting that was something that was necessary. I think there was a legitimate way to do that. I joined the UDR and did it that way. Others didn't. But I think, as Billy Mitchell, the peacemaker, once said, someone didn't fly over Northern Ireland in the late 60s and sprinkle crazy dust and turned all young men into killers. There was something in our world that raised that. And the opportunity to help and the opportunity to see people move away from that remains one of the biggest privileges I've ever had.
I mean, East Belfast Mission, very well known, what is now thought of as Skenos and known as Skenos. There are a lot of programmes there, a lot of really interesting things have been happening over the years. So it must have been, you said you felt you belonged, it must have been an exciting time. You must have thought, God's doing stuff here.
Yeah, he was, and it was an exciting time, and it was a challenging time, and there was certainly a kickback there that I haven't experienced since living in Newton Ards. It was a more volatile community at that time. I think the world of paramilitary organisations was a little bit more cohesive then. If you wanted to talk to leadership, that might be 2 or 3 people. I think that's very, very different now. So it was a privilege, and it was a challenge, and it was exhausting, and it was enlightening.
But it enabled you to achieve some quite amazing things. Not you personally, but the group of people that you were facilitating. It enabled you to do some things that really brought some positive transformation within that community.
Yeah, I got to stand on the shoulders of some giants, really, in that community. Some are still around and some aren't. I learned a lot from them. I learned things that were right to do, and I learned what not to do. And, you know, it was a fascinating time looking back. A privilege, one of the privileges of my life, really.
I know that we took some learning from what you had done in Inner East in particular around facilitating the forum that you facilitated, and we enabled a Newtownards Community Forum, which was sort of modelling what you'd done. And I think you're right, there's a really difficult place because you're learning on the job, as it were, what to do and what not to do, because you're going into places, and to be honest, you're relying on God hugely. Did you feel that was something that you really had to do at the time?
There was no script.
Yes,
there was no script, and you very much were responding to the events of the time. And for example, when the flag protest happened in around 2013, that kind of turned that whole community on its head, and a lot of the work that had been successful post giants like David Irvine, for example, that really was turned on its head. And I think it's taken since then to regain some of what was lost. I don't know. I don't work in that community anymore, but I'm not sure if they've ever claimed back what was lost through the flag protest.
Although there's a story I often tell, because one night I was on riot duty and I followed, because that's the way it tended to be, a riot up the Newtownards Road as the police moved the rioters back few yards by few yards. And they did, if you've been to one, and I know most people haven't, they do it by lining the Land Rovers up across the road and making an announcement and warning people to move back, and then they push forward, and that's how it was done. And it went all the way past East Belfast Mission. And that was the place where no one threw a thing, no one lifted a thing, no one damaged a thing, no one tried in any way to interfere with the building there. And it just struck me because it was happening in all sorts of places, but not in that building. And I just wondered if that was just the way it was, or if there was a significance that everybody thought, well, this is something that's ours, and we're just gradually moving past it. I just was intrigued by the way that crowd, who were out to cause trouble that night and out to throw things at coppers or peelers or whatever way you want to term it, didn't do anything to East Belfast Mission. Really interesting.
Yeah, I think East Belfast Mission is a giant of an organisation in terms of its impact, and yet it is an organisation that has consistently just washed the feet of the community. I know that it has 150 years perhaps of engagement in that local community. Before they built Skenos, there was an old graveyard on that site, and each of the bodies had to be exhumed and carefully, reinterred elsewhere in conjunction with the community, because it was part of them. And it became a mission on the same date in 1985 that the Anglo-Irish Agreement came out. And I think that's the answer to your question, is why was it not touched? It's because it's the community's building, and that was key.
Yeah. You talked about having no script, Mark, and I think, to be honest, that really resonates with me. But having no script means that you can come into real difficulties and have real challenges. And I know what we experienced at the Link was extremely challenging in terms of some of the journey that we had to go on. How do you cope with that, and how do you get up and go on?
I think you don't go through life without facing huge challenges at times. Some of those challenges are thrust upon you externally. You're in no control of them. Some of them are through your own mistakes, your own missteps, your own errors. And the key question in life, and for those, all you can do is regret, be remorseful, reflect, and learn. And I think the key question in life as I get older has tended to be, what will we do next? Because life will deal a bad hand to some people, and some people through their own choices will cause their own downfall. But the hope of the gospel is, what do we do next? The hope of the gospel is that which seems to be dead will be alive. The hope of the gospel is that we know how the story ends now, that every death is followed by a resurrection, and we get that opportunity. And I guess that's kind of what I've tried to do. I think God's grace is an incredibly embracing thing. I think East Belfast Mission, the Link, they've had a grace on them as organisations, but so too do people. And there are people for seasons, and there are people who move on and do other things. And who knows how our journey, I wouldn't be directing the Link if you were still directing the Link, but we move on, and we take all that we've learnt with us, don't we? And we carry it with us, and all you can hope and pray for is that in your learning you don't repeat those mistakes.
Yeah, and there has to be a time, I think, as well, that you've given all you can give for that time, for such a time as that. For me, it was the 15 years. Had I anything more to give? And I think that's the other thing. You need to know when it's time to move on.
It's another season.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Eugene Peterson says, the people of God are always on a journey. And that's not a theology I grew up with. The theology I grew up with was the destination was heaven. You prayed the prayer, and that was it. But the journey it's an old-fashioned word, is pilgrimage, isn't it? And a pilgrimage is often uphill, rocky, muddy, messy. And the learning is in the hard moments. The learning is rarely the mountaintop.
Yeah, that's very
and
true.
That's certainly been my experience.
So you moved on from East Belfast. You're in Newtownards now with the Link. And I'm thinking about all the times in your career that, and you've alluded to it, you've had relationships with people who have or have had or are still having difficult or criminal pasts, presents, potentially futures. And you know and understand the impact and influence paramilitaries can have on a community. So how do you gain that respect? How do you get that relationship where you can do business, where you can talk turkey effectively?
I think you have to listen more than you speak. You have to learn to not show up at every fight you're invited to. There are battles to fight and there are battles to walk away from. I love the imagination we can use within the scriptures. And I love within the story of where Jesus is in Gethsemane and the guards come to arrest him. And Peter takes the sword and lops the guard's ear off. And Jesus says, "Put away your sword." But in my imagination, Jesus is also giving us a message which is non-violence, but also if you cut someone's ears off, they can't hear you. And community work has got to be about listening and responding in a way that will not either cut the ears off someone or close their ears. And that takes time, and it takes patience, it takes grace, it takes courage, it takes passion. It takes all of those things. And it also takes comrades. You need people around you. So if I were running a class on it, those are some of the things that I would say. I think you've got to be prepared to wash feet if you're going to get involved in community life.
Well, you gave your time and you gave your skills. So, you invested in policing and community safety. You were in a district policing and community safety partnership, and I always have to read that because I can never remember the order of the words.
It doesn't roll off the tongue very easily.
But it is important in what it's in, and for a time you committed to that and said, I'm going to stand up and be counted in that area.
Yeah, and I think when you're in a community and when you invested in it for a period of time, you earn the right to speak. But I think you can do that too early. I think, again, you've got to watch and listen and see how the land lies. Build relationships with people. The great genius of Jesus was he built relationships, genuine friendships with people you and I may not want sitting beside us in church. And if we're not prepared to do that, peacemaking is not the career to get into.
Is it a career, though?
Well, I use that word loosely. I think it's a vocation for some people.
I agree.
I think it is a career for some. I think, again, there's a grace on some people to do it, and you can see also those who shouldn't do it. You know, you can see those who are not gifted in that, or whose motivation isn't correct for being involved in that work. And I would particularly want to say that I think, and I can only really speak for loyalist communities, I think loyalist communities have fallen victim to people whose motive has not always been their well-being.
I'm really interested in this concept of, or the importance of listening. But sometimes I'm wondering if we're really hearing. We're really hearing what people are saying, or how do we enable people to hear rather than already have decided in their mind what the answer is or the decision that they want to take? How do we listen well?
Two things, Dan. I think number one, the church is more comfortable, generally speaking, prophetically than trying to listen prophetically. And I think all prophetic speaking must be preceded with prophetic listening. And I'm not sure that always happens. And of course, if you're not listening prophetically, what you might say prophetically may just be your own words and not God's words. So I think that's incredibly important. And also, very often when we're speaking, can happen even in a podcast, I'm preparing my reply as you speak rather than truly hearing what you're saying.
Or letting you have your turn.
Yeah.
Rather than really listening.
And so dialogue's an interesting word.
Yeah.
I think a long dialogue is important. Conversation. Taking time with it. And often the best listening and speaking is done outside of meetings.
Yeah, I find that too. So Mark, the whole reason for this podcast is about what is it that inspires some people to get engaged in some of these difficult things, or even to get engaged in something. So what is it, first of all, that inspires you? And then what would you encourage others to do just to start something small?
I think primarily for me, I'm still the kid that somebody else took time to listen to. I'm the kid who was given the grace to walk to the left to the Boys Brigade rather than the right to the UDA. That wasn't necessarily, I don't think that was my choice. I think there was a grace in that. And I think that grace has to be unfolded to everyone in life. And I am such a beneficiary of that grace that I want to just give that away to others. Now, that's easily said right now. That rolls off the tongue, but it's much harder to live. And of course, the hardest place to live with grace is your own home. You know, my wife and daughters will listen to this and going, yeah, that's not what you were saying this morning.
Yes.
Yeah, see that? Put that in your next sermon, Mark. Right. But I'm passionate to give that away because I live every day as a beneficiary of the grace of God and of people. and my family especially, that's why.
And what would you say to someone as just even a small step they could take to start engaging in some way in that listening?
I think there's a lot of noise in our world, and you get to choose what noise you will listen to. We are in control of it. We're in control of what we open on our device. We're in control of when we switch it off. And I think you've got to, I don't even want to give advice, my counsel might be to be careful about what you listen to. Be selective. I think there are writers and artists who can help us with that. I think Eugene Peterson, Henry Nouwen, Richard Rohr, Brian McLaren, Dallas Willard. I think there are giants out there in the literary world, particularly within the Christian world, who are great commentators. And as I'm sure broadcasters love to listen to great commentators. I think we need to do the same. And sometimes the loudest voice in the Christian community is like the world of worship music. I want to challenge that and say, I'm not sure that's the voice we should be listening to. I'm not sure that songs of battle and war are what we are helpful in our climate and in our time. I understand why they're there, but I think there are other voices we need to hear.
In the first two series of Inspired to Act, we've brought the best part of 20 voices into conversation and given them time. And we just want to thank you for being one of them, because it's fascinating listening to you. It's honest, it's candid. It's probably a little bit cathartic, I don't know. But it's certainly very, very useful for us and very inspiring. So thank you for coming, Mark, and telling us your story.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for listening. And believe it or not, this is the last episode in our second series of Inspired to Act.
It's hard to believe, isn't it? 16 remarkable episodes resonating around the internet already.
It is, and don't worry, we don't want to hang up our headphones just yet, so all being well, we'll be back very soon.
We hope you've been inspired to act by the people you've met in these podcasts. We want to give our thanks to the Community Relations Council and also to Commission Christian Radio for making this series possible.
And if you've a thought or a comment about Inspired to Act, please send us a text from your podcast app. We'd love to hear from you.
Do check out Thrive Ireland at thriveIreland.org. Find Thrive Ireland on Instagram and Facebook too. And there's a YouTube channel.
And keep an ear out for when we're back. But bye for now.
Bye.